let's recall or aim to remember when you were 13 years old, whether you were playing basketball, lacrosse, or football, and how were those coaches communicating to you? And it was, it was the same thing. I'm sure you hear a lot of oh, kids these days. Like, what's wrong with kids these days? No, 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 no. I'm sure you were the same lazy, not listening kid way back when. Let's put ourselves in those shoes for a moment, and what can we, how can we communicate? What can we say to then pull them into our perspective to get them to apply said direction that we need them to? And this led, certainly perspective that I had when I was working with you way back when in Tampa, and we had that opportunity to go help that high school football team out, and that was 100% culture first shift. And sometimes we were coaching and directing, but mainly what you were aiming to do was train these kids. They needed discipline. They needed perspective. So it was more like training a dog, and then it was coaching them up. They earned that coaching, but through that perspective, okay, we're going to aim for discipline first.
Oh, that's huge. And I think that's such a great step where oftentimes we as coaches, we always forget where we started. But on that note, one of the hardest parts about coaching is the majority of us are gym rats. And if you look at the hierarchy of athletes in a team setting, you'll have half of those guys, maybe even 2/3 of those guys don't even want to be there. No. When we were younger, it was half of them wanted to be there. The other half I'll be here because my friends are here. But nowadays, when I look at it, I literally can take 2 slices of that big old pie and say, you know what, most of these guys don't want to be here. And that's a huge difference between, for instance, we now have to ask pubescent boys to put more weight on the bar on a bench press. And that was unheard of when we were growing up. We were the generation and everybody prior to that, I may not have been ready to do 225 on the bench, but sure enough, I was going to put 225 on the bench. Nowadays, you have kids that look at discomfort and they look at trials and tribulations completely different. And a lot comes from their upbringing. A lot comes from the verbiage that's used around the house. The parents talk differently than the way that our parents talk to us. And so there's an empowering to the way that their behavior has shifted. And so it's always interesting where you get a 13-year-old male who really doesn't want to touch heavy weights. And that's the shift where you talk about, how do I not only tell them how to get to where they want to be, but this day and age, it's so much more important. And I know it sounds fluffy, but you have to let them feel something. And then when you see that emotional response, then you kind of have a hook there. When all of a sudden you see a kid look confused, or he starts to, his eyes get a little watery, or he looks frustrated. This is the coaching that we live in now is, okay, that's what I was looking for. Now I can go talk to this person. You couldn't do that back in the day, but nowadays this is what the kids need. They crave that, like accountability, responsibility, things like that. You could sit there and talk to all of these kids till you're blue in the face, but they don't understand that concept. But the moment they feel that concept, it can grow so much deeper roots, because a lot of these kids are different and they're better than we were, because they're almost taught to be okay with feeling. When we were growing up, it was like, hide your feelings, shove them in the corner, bury them deep down in, bottle it up, let it fester and grow until you just absolutely blow up on somebody. But these younger kids, they know, they go, oh, well, hey, coach, I'm feeling a little bit. And you're like, okay, I understand. I'm glad you feel that. This is why.
Man, that's a key point, and this is a good segue into one of the topics I want to cover, in that the pipe pledge, and where previously, I guess our growing up, we could end with the E, which is the emotional quotient. Now, do you suggest we begin with that E? Should we rearrange this and make a word that makes no sense?
You actually have to. Nowadays, it doesn't mean anything to them. The more that I'm around these young kids, the more that I realize they've literally turned everything back in on themselves. Where if you ask somebody to do something, especially if it's difficult, back in the day, you could coach a kid to say, hey, this is going to help the team. Hey, this is going to help your fellow linebackers. Hey, this is going to help you guys when you are playing man defense on the basketball court. Nowadays, and it sounds terrible, but you have to play the hand that's dealt. You have to take a kid and go, if you're asking a kid to do dead bugs and it feels absolutely terrible, and his ego is struggling because he can't do something. And that's a huge thing for these young kids. They're struggling and nobody wants to look stupid. Social media has now put at the forefront that everybody wants to look glorious. And so the moment that a kid doesn't feel like they're excelling, then they potentially can shut the door. And so now at that point in time, we used to be able to say, hey, don't quit for your other teammates. Don't quit on this, don't quit on that. But nowadays, the young kids wanting to go, hey, how does this help me? They all point back to themselves. And probably 10 years ago, that was a very jagged pill for me to swallow. It was like, well, screw you little punks. This isn't about you. This is about the team. But then the more you do it, you realize you're shutting the door on these kids, and I could win the battle, and I can make them do a set of dead bugs and be absolutely miserable for a day or season or whatever you have it, but I'll lose the war. Mm-hmm. And that's the issue, that we may not like the landscape that we're in, but we have to learn how to navigate it. So when I look at that pipeline, I truly started to go, let's not look at these in order. Let's look at this as a dancing Venn diagram. So you've got that PIPE, and they are moving all over the place. And that E is a big target. If you can hit that E, you have a really good chance to develop a stronger relationship with that athlete.
I'm going back. I'm a loaded freight train, and I'm right on track.